What would be a better monetary policy, a gold standard, or the denationalization of money? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principled case for libertarianism and has for a long time. And I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, good to see y'all again. And if you're brand new to FFF, come and subscribe to our journal, our daily journal, FFF Daily, and visit our website for 34 years of solid libertarian articles. So, Richard, let's talk about monetary policy this week. The country started out with what was called a gold standard, and we ultimately turned to a paper money standard, which I'll talk about in a minute. But then Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economics Nobel Prize winning economist, came up with the idea of denationalization of money, which is essentially saying get government out of the monetary sphere entirely. So I thought, why don't we have a discussion of those two concepts of a gold standard versus the denationalization of money? So I'll start out with just a little introductory statement of what we're dealing with on this issue. Obviously, it's a very pertinent issue. We've got prices soaring at the grocery store, at the gas pump. The Federal Reserve is up to its antics again of trying to manage the money supply. They're having a hard time doing it. There's a lot of people struggling, a lot of people hurting, people at the bottom of the economic ladder by these soaring prices at the gas pump, the paycheck to paycheck people. I mean, the well-to-do, the middle class, they can adjust. I mean, everybody's adversely affected by what's going on, what we call price inflation. But the middle class, the upper middle class, the wealthy, they can adjust. The people at the bottom cannot adjust. They don't have any maneuver room, the paycheck to paycheck people. Well, if we go back to the founding monetary system of the United States, we see that the framers, our ancestors, were very concerned about this happening, that the government would begin inflating the money supply and debasing the value of money, and essentially taxing people indirectly. I mean, that's what inflation is. It's a tax where the government doesn't want to raise direct taxes like the income tax and other taxes because they know people get upset with that, especially at election time. And so there's the indirect form of taxation called inflation, where they just print the money up to pay their expenditures. The value of the money starts dropping. People don't realize the government's behind this. They start blaming the people who are raising prices. And the rising prices are just a reflection of the debased value of the currency. So our ancestors said, we're going to protect the American people against this. And so we're not going to have a paper money standard. The government's not going to be able to print money because it was a gold coin, silver coin standard. The actual money was gold coins and silver coins. And that's in the Constitution. I mean, even there's even express prohibitions against the government not having the power, the federal government, to emit bills of credit, which was called paper money. They could issue bills and notes and evidence of indebtedness to borrow money, but everybody understood that those were promises to pay gold coins and silver coins, to pay real money. And the Constitution also prohibited the states from emitting bills of credit, paper money, and then making anything but gold coins and silver coins legal tender. So this was the official money of the United States for over 100 years. And then all of that changes in the 1930s, which we'll talk about later on in this discussion, hopefully. But then America's converted to a paper money standard. And we've got a central bank, a Federal Reserve that's established in 1913. America had lived without paper money and a central bank for more than 100 years. It was the soundest money system in history. And it really was a major factor in the tremendous economic prosperity that took place in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Then the paper money standard comes in and we can see the results. I mean, the value of this paper dollar from 1913 on is just a downward trend. That's how they were plundering and looting, and have been plundering and looting the American people indirectly, and they're continuing to do so. And they've got a debt of $34 trillion. You know as well as I do that they're going to have to print the money to pay off this debt. And so the Federal Reserve is squeezed. They don't know which direction to go in. They keep interest rates high, but their interest on the debt they're having to pay is enormous now. And so how are they going to resolve this? Well, however they resolve it, it's not going to look pretty. And so where do we go from here? Hayek says, let's just get government entirely out of the monetary sphere. So it's different from the gold coin, silver coin standard, where we had this really sound money system, but the government was in charge. There's no question. The Treasury minted the coins, but it was a very honest system. Unlike regimes throughout history, they came up with gold coins that were solid gold coins. There's never any evidence of fraud throughout the 1800s and early 1900s in the production of gold coins and silver coins. And they were beautiful coins, St. Gaudens and the silver dollars, and it was a solid monetary system. But now Hayek's saying, well, even better than that, let's just get government entirely out of the monetary sphere. Just separate money in the state and let the free market decide what people want to use, whether it's gold coins, silver coins, bitcoins, American Express banknotes, whatever. Let the market decide. So that's what I want to discuss with you today. What do you think?
Well, so again, let me sort of add to some of the history that you were giving. First of all, it's important to remember that money is not the creation or the creature of the state. As the famous founder of the Austrian school, Karl Menger, argued, money emerges out of the market itself. People want to trade and exchange, even in primitive times. They find that there are the difficulties of trading through barter. You have what I want, but I do not have what you want. Obviously, we cannot consummate an exchange. Or you have what I want, I have what you want. But if we divide the goods up into portions to fit whatever ratio of exchange we agree to, so much of one in exchange for so much of another, the division of the commodities may diminish or destroy their value for whatever purpose you wanted it. So people came to realize that rather than leave the arena of exchange frustrated and disappointed for these types of reasons, we can imagine that Joe wants to buy Bob's good, but Bob doesn't want Joe's good. But Joe sees that there's Sam, and Sam seems to have a commodity that a lot of people want and are willing to take in exchange so that Sam is able to get a lot of what he desires. So then he decides, well, maybe I should trade my good if Sam wants some of it and get what Sam has. And then once I have this good that Sam produces or is able to have access to, and a lot of people will take off his hands in exchange for what he wants, I then can buy all the other goods that I want. And we can imagine what the Sam is. He's been digging gold out of the ground. And gold has value because it has ornamental uses, industrial, manufacturing uses, even in primitive times, given the technologies of those much earlier eras. And then, therefore, it is valuable to people. A lot of people want it for different types of these real commodity reasons. But then what has happened is that people start using it as a medium of exchange. I trade what I have for some of this gold, not because I need any more gold or have a particular use for gold myself, but because a lot of people want gold and will sell me all the things they want that I desire for these sums of gold. And so over time, commodities like gold and silver became the media of exchange, habit, routine, custom, tradition. And as a consequence, then people just take it for granted. Well, you're specializing in producing something. You first sell what you're offering to others for this other commodity, such as gold or silver. And then since everybody has come to take it for granted that they just take gold and silver and trade because they know they can turn around and trade it away for what they want, it becomes the medium of exchange. And that's what money is always defined as, the most widely used and generally accepted medium of exchange. But that has emerged through the market itself. Governments wanted to take advantage of this. Governments have an insatiable desire for wealth. And this insatiable desire for wealth is shown through kings and princes and lords and tyrants taxing their subjects. But eventually people feel squeezed too much and they might revolt even against the tyrant. And so the subterfuge was devised to basically call in the coins Oh, these are rough coins. How do you know what their real content? I have a royal minter. I'll have the royal minter melt down your coin. We're keeping a record of how much everybody is given. And he'll make a new coin. And to assure that you can have confidence in this coin, I'm going to have embossed on one side of the coin a profile of my face. And if you can't trust the king's face, whose face can you trust? But of course, what the king would say, literally or metaphorically, to the minter, when you're melting down the coins and you're now going to remint them, and let's say it says you on it an ounce of gold, which it's supposed to represent, along with a few of the minor other metallics to make the coin more solid. Uh, don't put a full ounce of gold in. Put 9/10 of an ounce of gold and take all these little 1/10 from this coin and this coin and this coin, and then mint me a new coin that I can now use as a subterfuge of sort of indirectly taxing people by diluting the value of their own commodity gold money. And that's about how this basically began in a very general, generic way. Now, you mentioned the United States or the founding fathers. The fact is that early on, people became in the colonies became very suspicious of paper money. Paper monies were used during the colonial periods, but during the American Revolution, the British occupied all the major ports: Boston, New York, where I am, Charleston, Philadelphia. How do you raise money, right? You need money, right? George Washington has his army. They need uniforms. They need equipment. They need ammunition. They need tents to be using for shelter in the summer or the winter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we how do this rebelling 13 colonies raise enough money? They couldn't. So the Continental Congress, which was the association of the 13 rebelling colonies, decided to issue what they called Continental Notes. And these would be promises to pay after the revolution to merchants, tradesmen, manufacturers. You sell us the things that we need to fight the revolution against the British, and then we'll pay you back in commodity money, gold money, when we have been victorious. Well, of course, a lot of people were suspicious to take these monies to begin with, right? Oh, yeah, I support the idea of independence, but it's little pipsqueak us against the British Empire. Fat chance. So they were reluctant to do this, but you'd offer premiums. And at the end of the day, they issued all these round after round of Continental Notes to basically finance Washington's army and other things that were needed for the revolution. The consequence is, with issuing of all these notes and then people using these notes as money substitutes, you had Continental Note price inflation. What was the response of some of the colonial governments in rebellion? Wage and price controls. In fact, there was an episode in Albany, New York, which was not under British occupation, but the colonials, that two men were brought to a scaffold in the center of Albany and about to be hung for violating the price control regulations. And they fell on their knees and they promised never to do it again. And they were let go. That's a true story. The upshot of this, Jacob, as you were emphasizing, is that when, to many people's surprise, the revolutionaries won and the British conceded their independence after 1783, the consequence is that when they then wrote the Constitution in 1787, they specified those clauses in it that you're referring to of what is lawful money, gold and silver, and that the issuance of paper money was looked down upon, frowned upon. And in fact, people would say, whenever one advocate, printing paper money to finance state expenses or even the new federal government, they would shake their head, not worth a continental, not worth a continental, referring to these debased and inflated continental notes from the revolutionary period. And then after that, we were basically on a form of a gold standard up until the American Civil War, when both the new Confederacy and the Union government under Abraham Lincoln found themselves under dire financial burdens to fight their respective sides of the Civil War, and both resorted to paper money inflations. And caused, in fact, in the case of the Confederacy, what is usually considered a hyperinflation, prices rising on average in general more than 50% on a monthly basis. But in the North, you had high price inflation because they were just printing all of this paper money. But then that episode resulted in the years after the Civil War to a return to a gold standard. And that was, in effect, a government managed gold standard, fair enough. But as you were pointing out, solid restrictions on the ability to arbitrarily and capriciously just increase the amount of money in circulation. Paper money was not money. They were basically claims to the real money, which was gold or as well as silver. And as a consequence, if you deposited gold and silver in a bank, the bank issued these notes to you, claims to it, like a claim check. And unless net additions of gold or silver were deposited into the banking system, banks could not issue more notes. So as a consequence, it was the supply and demand and the real scarcity of gold and minorly silver that limited the ability for the money supply to expand. And that was the monetary system that the United States had shortly after the Civil War into the First World War. What broke that down, again, as you were saying, is that in 1913, the Federal Reserve came into existence by an act of Congress. It opens its doors in early 1914, just a few months before the beginning of the First World War. We did not enter the First World War until April of 1917. We were in the last year and a half of the war, 1914 to November 1918. But then once we were in the war, the Woodrow Wilson administration needed money to send the troops over, to supply them in the field, et cetera, et cetera. And approximately 40% of the government's war expenditures were covered by the new Federal Reserve, basically printing money to cover the debt that the Woodrow Wilson administration had issued. And following everything else, price controls, production controls, which were only lifted at the end of the war. They tried to return to sort of the gold standard, but then with the coming of the Great Depression, as you were pointing out as well, particularly with Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal beginning in 1933, the U.S. was soon taken off formally the gold standard. Americans were not allowed to own gold. They were required to turn in the gold to the federal government in exchange for Federal Reserve notes, that is gold coins, bars. Collector's coins were obviously allowed, or industrial uses like teeth filling, jewelry, et cetera. But any type of gold that was directly seen as a medium of exchange, such as the coin or the bars, had to be turned in mandatorily. And failure to do so could result in arrest, imprisonment, fine, and confiscation of your gold and silver, where you got nothing, not even the paper notes. And the final nail in the coffin of the government's supposedly formal gold standard came in the early 1970s when a Republican president, Richard Milhouse Nixon, formally took the U.S. off the gold standard in the sense that while Americans could not own gold, foreign governments who were holding U.S. dollars in their own vault reserves could turn in those dollars for gold. And then President of France, Charles de Gaulle, got suspicious of all of this and started turning in dollars for gold. The U.S. and Nixon's administration got nervous that if France does it, this will set off a sort of an avalanche of other governments doing it. And then the U.S. does not have enough gold in Fort Knox, et cetera, to cover all of these paper money claims that they had been issuing in quantities far greater than official redemption. And so after the early 1970s, the U.S. was formally, totally, globally off the gold standard. And since then, we've just been on a paper money. And we've seen how the consequences of that been. This roller coaster of inflations, recessions, sometimes the Federal Reserve acting more moderate in managing it. But certainly since the beginning of the 21st century, with the 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and then Iraq, having created all of this money for that and other reasons, setting the stage for the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and the financial crisis, the housing crisis, the Federal Reserve's response of printing even more money, and then the COVID business, we are now have been put in a situation where basically there is only the minimal attempt to restrain or control the abuses of the printing press by the Federal Reserve, either in its own ideas of how the monetary system in terms of quantity of money should be managed, or to be covering the deficits of the government by printing money to cover the securities that have been issued as the government's IOUs. And this is the dilemma we're in. And then just to finish one other point here, were there advocates of ending this? You mentioned Hayek. Well, Hayek was a colleague and a sort of a protege of the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. And early on in the 1920s, in his book, The Theory of Money and Credit, and then in his later writings, Mises had said the only way to end the abuse of the monetary printing press, particularly as had been seen in the hyperinflations immediately after the First World War, was to break the relationship between government and money. Competitive private banking based on a commodity such as gold, in which the government has no role in money. Banks take deposits of gold and silver. Each bank, as a private institution, issues their own notes as the claims to that which a depositor had left them for safekeeping, and just get the government out of the system. And then Hayek, of course, after he won the Nobel Prize he won the prize in 1974. In 1976, came out with this monograph, Denationalization of Money, published by the Institute of Economic Affairs, and then reprinted by the Cato Institute shortly after that. Basically made the case is that the only way to end this abuse of both the literal and the figurative printing press is to take government totally out of it. Government has no responsibility for banking. Government has no responsibility to determine, issue, or control the supply of money. Take government out of the hands of government. Just as we talk about separating church and state, so government cannot abuse or give favoritism to one faith or religion over another, or try to influence the creeds of the religions. Get government out of the monetary system. Totally privatize it. Leave it to the market decision making, which means all of us as consumers and producers, as to what kind of money serves our purposes, which kind of monies for different uses we try to use, and keep the government's hand off the printing press. Otherwise, we're just always going to be in this roller coaster that invariably gets worse over time.
Well, you've raised a lot of great points, and one of the points you've raised is great, is the early inflation with respect to gold coins. Before Gutenberg invents the printing press, there's no paper money because nobody knows how to print, and so the government had gold coins that had the king's face on them and so forth. And so, as you point out, people like pay their taxes with a gold coin, and the government, the king, then shaves the edges off the gold coin, and so it's now like 9/10 of an ounce, as you said, and then it takes its shavings and melts them down into a new gold coin. So they can now have a new gold coin to spend that it says 1 ounce when it's really 9/10 of an ounce. And this was the start of legal tender laws, that people started figuring out, hey, this gold coin that you're giving me to buy merchandise here is only 9/10 of an ounce, even though it says 1 ounce. So I'm going to give you less than what you're buying here. The price is 1 ounce for this merchandise, and you're only giving me 9/10 of an ounce. So I'm not going to accept your gold coin at face value. I'm going to accept it at a discount. Well, the king got furious over this. Oh, you're impugning the integrity of the king by not accepting our coins at face value. And so that's where legal tender laws come into place, where the king says, you have to accept these coins for 1 ounce, even though in reality they're only 9/10 of an ounce. And so you can have inflation, which everybody at one time understood was inflating the money supply. The prices are not inflation. The fact that the prices are rising, that's a reflection of the inflation or expansion of the money supply. But unfortunately, the mainstream media and mainstream economists have come to say, oh, inflation is rising prices rather than the expansion of the money supply. So we Austrians and libertarians have now distinguished between price inflation and the monetary inflation. But then, as you point out, when we jump ahead to the Civil War, Lincoln starts issuing all these promissory notes, and people start realizing they don't have the gold to honor these notes. And so those notes start being spent at a discount. That when you go into a store owner is going to say, no, you don't get the 1 ounce here. The note is promising to pay 1 ounce, but we all know that there's a risk of default here. So those notes start being spread at a discount. And in other words, people are not accepting them at face value. And Lincoln gets furious like this, like the kings of old. That's where they passed legal tender laws, saying, no, you have to accept our notes at face value. And that case actually goes to the Supreme Court. and because there's no authority for legal tender laws in the Constitution. And sure enough, the Supreme Court declares Lincoln's legal tender laws unconstitutional. But within a year, because of a shift in the court, uh, I forget how it worked out. One guy retires and two vacancies are filled and so forth. They reverse that and say, well, no, we're going to uphold the legal tender laws after all. And to this day, we have legal tender laws. Now, as you point out, everything pretty much returned to normal after the Civil War. You got the gold coin standard again. And let's keep in mind what I said earlier, that the government did not do what kings of old had done, the federal government with gold coins. There weren't any shavings and so forth. These were solid gold coins and silver coins for more than 100 years. Another interesting thing that I ought to mention is in the olden days, they would actually just punch a hole in the gold coin and take the plug and mount up their plugs and melt that down a gold coin. So you always knew what the king had done because there was a hole in the gold coin where they had done this. And in other words, they weren't trying to disguise it with the shavings. So then, but clearly the gold coin standard, silver coin standard was a constraint on government, because if they issued too many notes, people would start to figure it out and they would go to the bank and say, I want these gold coins. There'd be run on the banks and so forth, essentially a run on the government. So the government was always constrained, the federal government, from issuing too much paper notes. And then that's the whole idea of Roosevelt getting off the gold coin standard. He made it a felony offense, if you pointed out, as you pointed out. And this really could not be done without a constitutional amendment. I mean, this is built into the Constitution to protect us against this paper money system. And no, Roosevelt does it first by decree, and then he gets congressional ratification and completely converts the monetary system to a paper money standard. Denationalizes gold completely. It confiscates gold. Everybody's required to turn their gold coins in. It was the most unbelievable. I think it's one of the most despicable, horrific acts of tyranny in the history of this country, because you had to go to the Constitution, the amendment route, to change our monetary system. He did not do that. And so we're living today because of what he did, this paper money standard that's been an inflationary holocaust. I mean, just debasing currency, and really plundering and looting people through this debasement process, and making them believe that the fault of all this is the businesses that are raising prices, when really the rising prices are just a reflection of the debasement. And so I would love the idea of restoring the idea of the gold coin, silver coin standard. It provided the soundest money in the history of this country. But I think Hayek's got the better of the argument, and Mises is the best thing to do is get government entirely out of this area. You know, the free market produces the best of everything. We know that, and the free market will produce the best money.
If I can just add one sort of a curious story. Now, I read this decades ago. It was in an article in the Quarterly Journal of Economics from the 1880s. But it's a curious story. It seems that during the American Civil War, the federal government is trying to collect taxes from businesses in California. And the businesses have decided, many businessmen decide that they're going to pay the taxes in the debased greenbacks, the federal government's paper money, the Lincoln government's paper money. And the Lincoln government says, no, you can't pay your taxes in greenbacks. You have to pay us in gold. And this went to the courts, and the courts upheld these California businessmen because they said, look here, you can't say these greenbacks are legal tender and not be willing to accept them as taxes, since they're your money. And so therefore the businessmen could pay their taxes in this depreciated, less valuable media of exchange than the gold itself. It's a little curious story. I think I have all the facts, general facts about it. But the general point is that when Hayek wrote the Denationalization of Money, I believe either in the foreword or in the first chapter, he says that there has been this historically long experience with government in one way or another, either controlling or having a significant influence on the ability to create money to serve its own fiscal purposes. And then everything has been attempted, a gold standard, monetary rules like Milton Friedman had proposed, et cetera, et cetera. But that it was clear that, and he himself, Hayek, had defended a gold standard at one time. He believed that there was a necessity for a central bank in some of his earlier writings, but he now came to the conclusion, and they say, the older you get, the more difficult it is to sort of change your ideas. But Hayek is an example of the reverse of that, because he said, I believed in a gold standard. I thought a central bank was necessary, but now reflecting on the history of money through the ages, there's only one solution if we want to end these roller coasters of inflations followed by recessions and debasement of people's wealth, is getting government out of the monetary business completely. And by doing so, you also put a check on the government's ability to defraud the people, because now either they have to tell the people, we need more of your money through taxes to cover our expenses, or then the government just has to directly borrow without being able to have money created to cover the borrowing. And then you have to go to lenders and say, we need your money. And then they're going to pay a rate of interest. And then they have no way to get around this other than the intention and the need to eventually tax future taxpayers to pay back the debt that has been incurred. There's honesty in this, as well as a limit and a check on the behavior and the incentives of the government.
All right, let's wrap this discussion up with just some book reading recommendations. I mean, obviously, the Denationalization of Money by Hayek. There's obviously Ludwig von Mises' Theory of Money and Credit, but that to me is a difficult read. I would recommend Murray Rothbard's What Has Government Done to Our Money? And I think Hans Sennholz, who had served as head of the economics department at Grove City College, Austrian economist, got his doctorate under Mises, served as president of the Foundation for Economic Education, where you also served as president. I think Sennholz's books on monetary theory are
Money and
fantastic.
inflation is a good one. Money and inflation.
Right. And I think Money and Freedom.
And money and freedom, yes.
Yeah, Sennholz is great. And so those are the books I would recommend.
I would recommend one other. I'm forgetting the author's name or who the publisher was, but it's called Monetary Central Planning and the State.
By
I
Richard
remember the
Eveling.
publisher, the Future Freedom Foundation, 2015. Now, what the hell was that author's name again? Maybe you can remember it, Jacob.
He's famous, Richard Eveling. Absolutely. I'm sorry you forgot about it, Richard.
But if I can just give a plug to my own book, if you don't toot your own horn, who's going to toot it, right? It's called Monetary Central Planning in the State. It was published by the Future Freedom Foundation in 2015. The first part of the book explains and contrasts the Austrian theory of money and the business cycle with both Keynesianism and monetarism, including the arguments that the Austrians had with the Keynesians over the causes, consequences, and cures for the Great Depression. And then the second part of the book is precisely on this theme of central banking versus private competitive banking, explaining the different positions and the logic in, if I can say, relatively great detail, but I like to think very readable for the interested reader.
No, it's fantastic. And there's another obscure, long forgotten book that I really loved when I was really getting into this. It's called Pieces of Eight by, I think, Edwin Vieira.
Oh,
And
yes, yes, yes.
if people can find that, it gives an absolutely fantastic history of money. So that's another one. All right, Richard, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Greatly enjoyed the conversation as always. Look forward to talking to you next week. And thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. Now, again, if you're new, come and visit us at FFF.org. Subscribe to our FFF Daily. And Richard, look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.